The morning they fired Maya Torres, she had exactly $11.40 in her purse, a 4-year-old son named Lucas asleep in the back of a car that barely ran, and no idea that the worst day of her life was also the first day of something she could never have imagined. She was 19 years old. She had done nothing wrong, and somewhere down the highway, a man who had not yet eaten in 2 days was about to change everything. But first, she had to survive the next 24 hours. Maya Torres had been working at Patty's roadside diner since the week after her 18th birthday, the same week she found out she was going to be a mother, and the same week her own mother told her she had to figure it out on her own. There was no dramatic scene, no shouting. Her mother, a tired woman worn down by years of disappointment, had simply looked at her across the kitchen table, folded her hands and said, "I raised you the best I could, Maya. I can't start over again." Then she had gone to bed. Maya had sat at that table alone until 3 in the morning, and by the time the sun came up, she had made a decision. She would not fall apart. She could not afford to. Lucas was born on a Tuesday in November. He was small and healthy and had his father's dark eyes, a man who had left town before Maya even told him she was pregnant. She did not chase him. She did not beg. She swaddled her son, looked at his tiny face, and made him a quiet promise. He would never know what it felt like to not be chosen. For the next 4 years, Maya built a small and fragile life, held together by willpower and routine. She rented a single room in a boarding house on the edge of Denton, a small town in central Texas. The room had a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a window that looked out at a chain-link fence. She paid Mrs. Garland, the landlady, $350 a month in cash, always on the first, never late. She worked the early morning shift at Patty's Diner, 5 to 1, 6 days a week. She walked Lucas to the church-run daycare 2 blocks away at 4:30 every morning. In the dark, his little hand in hers, his dinosaur backpack bouncing. She would pick him up at 1:15 after her shift, and the two of them would eat lunch together, usually whatever she had been allowed to bring home from the diner, and then spend the afternoon at the public library, where Lucas would sit on her lap while she read to him from books they could not afford to own. She was, by every measure, doing the right thing. She was working. She was present. She was not asking anyone for anything she had not earned. But doing the right thing, Maya had learned, did not protect you from a world that sometimes didn't care. The other waitresses at Patty's were mostly kind. Donna, who was 62 and had been working the counter since Reagan was president, would sometimes slip Maya an extra biscuit or cover a table so she could take a longer break. "You remind me of myself when I was young," Donna would say, though she never explained exactly what she meant by that, and Maya never asked. The manager, a man named Gerald Swick, was another matter entirely. Gerald was 44, balding, and possessed of the particular cruelty that belongs to small men given just enough authority to feel important. He scheduled Maya for the worst shifts, docked her pay when the register came up short, even when she hadn't been the one working the register, and made a habit of reminding her, in front of customers and co-workers alike, that she was replaceable. "You're lucky to have this job," he would say. "Single mom, no degree, no experience. You know how many girls I turned down to hire you?" Maya would smile, refill the coffee cups, and say nothing. She had learned that silence was cheaper than the argument. She had a son to feed. That ordinary, grinding, dignified struggle was her life. Until the Tuesday morning when a man walked into Patty's Diner on a motorcycle, with a beard down to his chest and hungry eyes, and Maya Torres made a choice that would cost her everything she had, and, in doing so, find something she had never known she could have. He came in at 7:45 on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning where the sky couldn't make up its mind between gray and blue and settled on both. Maya was refilling the salt shakers at the counter when the bell above the door rang and she looked up. The man who walked in was large, not threatening, exactly, but occupying space the way that certain people do, as though the room adjusted itself around him. He was somewhere in his 50s, with a gray-streaked beard, a leather vest over a dark shirt, and the careful, unhurried walk of a man who had spent a long time on the road. He sat himself at table 9, near the window, and set his helmet on the bench beside him like it was an old friend he was resting for a moment. Maya brought him water and a menu. He looked up at her and nodded. the way people nod when they mean thank you, but are too tired to form the word. "I'll give you a minute," she said. "I know what I want," he said. His voice was low and even. "Coffee, please. 2 eggs over. Easy, hash browns, wheat toast. And—" He paused, and something passed across his face that Maya would think about for a long time afterward. And actually just that. "That's fine." She wrote it down and brought him his coffee first. He wrapped both hands around the mug like it was warmth he needed as much as the caffeine. She noticed, without meaning to notice, that his hands were rough and calloused but clean. She noticed that the leather vest had a patch on the chest, a name, a symbol, but she did not read it closely. She had learned not to make assumptions about people from what they wore. She put in his order and went back to her work. It was 20 minutes later, when she brought his plate out, that she saw it. He had moved his coffee cup to the side and set his wallet on the table, an old worn thing, and it had fallen open when he set it down. Maya was not trying to see inside it, but she was close enough, and the wallet was open enough, that she could see clearly there was nothing in it, not a single bill, just a few folded papers, receipts maybe, or old notes, and the cracked plastic windows where cards would go, empty. He looked up at her as she set the plate down, and she saw the exact moment he realized she had seen. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his chin lifted just slightly, the way a person does when they are preparing to absorb something humiliating with what dignity they have left. "Actually," he said quietly, "I'm sorry to waste your time. I need to go." He began to stand. Maya looked at him. She thought about her own mornings. She thought about the times she had counted coins in the parking lot before going into the grocery store. She thought about the particular shame of hunger, not the physical ache of it, but the social weight of it, the way it made a person feel invisible and exposed at the same time. She put one hand gently on the edge of the table, not on his arm, not presumptuously, just a gesture to pause the moment. "Please sit down," she said. "Eat your breakfast. It's been taken care of." He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity," Maya said simply. "One person bought another person breakfast. That's just kindness. Eat while it's hot." He sat back down slowly. He ate. He did not look up much, but before he left, he stood at the table for a moment and said, in that same low, even voice, "What's your name?" "Maya," she said. He nodded once. "Thank you, Maya." He picked up his helmet. "I won't forget this." She watched him walk out to his motorcycle and ride away down the highway without looking back. She thought that was the end of it. Gerald Swick had been watching from near the kitchen door the whole time. Gerald called her into the back office at 11:15, 45 minutes before her shift ended. The office was really just a converted storage room with a metal desk and a corkboard full of health inspection certificates and old schedules. It smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaner. Gerald sat behind the desk and did not invite her to sit. "You comped that biker's meal," he said. It was not a question. "I paid for it myself," Maya said, "out of my tips." "You used the register." "I put the money in the register from my own pocket. I have the receipt I wrote myself. I can show you." Gerald studied her for a moment. He had the expression of a man who had already made a decision and was now constructing the justification for it. "We've had complaints," he said. "Customers who felt uncomfortable with the type of clientele you've been letting linger." He sat at one table for 20 minutes and ate breakfast. He was a biker, Maya. This is a family diner. He was a person who was hungry. Maya kept her voice steady, though she could feel something tightening in her chest. He didn't cause any trouble. He didn't make anyone uncomfortable. He ate his eggs and he left. The customer is always right. Which customer complained? Donna? Because Donna was the only other person in here. Gerald folded his hands on the desk. "I'm going to have to let you go." The room went very quiet. Maya stood still for a moment, and in that stillness she felt the full weight of what those words meant. Not just the job, the rent, the daycare, the groceries, the small and precisely calibrated machinery of survival she had spent 4 years building, gear by gear. "Gerald," she said. Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that later. "I have a 4-year-old son. I have never been late. I have never called in sick. I have never once given you a reason." 2 weeks severance, he said. He slid a folded piece of paper across the desk. That's more than required." She took the paper. She looked at it. She folded it in half. "One day," she said quietly, not with anger, with a kind of tired certainty, "you are going to regret how you treat people." She went to the floor, untied her apron, took her small bag from the hook by the employee entrance, and walked out into the parking lot where Lucas was sitting in the car. She had brought him to work that morning because the daycare was closed for a staff day, and he had been coloring quietly in the back seat all morning, happy with his crayons and a box of animal crackers. When she got in the car and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, he looked up from his drawing. "Mama, are we going?" "In a minute, baby," she said. She sat there for a long time, looking at the steering wheel, making the kind of calculations that people who live close to the edge are always making. 2 weeks severance, rent due in 9 days, enough food in the room for maybe 3 more days. Lucas's daycare cost $140 a month, which she had already paid for this month. Her car needed an oil change she had been putting off for 2 months. She was not afraid exactly. Fear was a luxury that required leisure. What she felt was something more like a very steady, very serious awareness of how narrow the path forward was. And then Lucas, who was 4 and therefore had no access to any of this calculation, leaned forward and put his small hand on her shoulder. "Mama," he said, "your face is sad." She turned and looked at her son. His dark eyes. His small, serious face. The crayon still in his hand, a purple dinosaur half finished on the paper in his lap. "I'm okay, baby," she said. And she meant it, because she had to mean it. She started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, and she did not look back at Patty's Diner. And she did not let herself cry until Lucas fell asleep that night. And then she cried very quietly into her pillow for about 4 minutes, and then she stopped, and she started making a plan. She had no idea that 2 miles down the highway, a man named Roy Harlan had pulled his motorcycle into a gas station, called a number he had memorized years ago, and said 9 words into the phone that would change Maya Torres's life forever. "I need to find a girl named Maya. She works at Patty's." What Maya did not know, what no one in Patty's Diner had known, was who the man at Table 9 actually was. His name was Roy Harlan. He was 53 years old. He had been riding motorcycles since he was 16, had been a member of the Hells Angels for 30 years, and had, at various points in those 30 years, been a man that people crossed the street to avoid. But that was not the whole of who Roy Harlan was. Roy Harlan was also the man who, after losing his son to a drunk driver 11 years ago, had started a charity foundation in that son's name. The Roy and Danny Harlan Foundation gave scholarships to single-parent households in rural Texas. Quiet, consistent, largely unpublicized work that had sent 41 young people to college over the past decade. Roy did not advertise it. He did not need the recognition. He did the work because Danny would have wanted him to. Roy was also a man who had spent the last 3 days riding from San Antonio to Lubbock and back, a kind of annual grieving ritual he had done every year on the week of Danny's birthday, riding alone, staying cheap, thinking. He had left his wallet in his saddlebag on the second night and had not realized until he sat down at Patty's Diner and unfolded it on the table. He had been prepared for the particular shame of asking to wash dishes or leave his contact information. He had been prepared for the door. What he had not been prepared for was a 19-year-old girl with tired eyes and sure hands, setting his breakfast down and saying, without a trace of condescension or performance, "One person bought another person breakfast. That's just kindness." Those words had reached somewhere inside Roy Harlan that he hadn't expected to have reached. He had thought about them all the way down the highway, and when he stopped for gas, he made the phone call. The person he called was his chapter secretary, a man named Deke who kept records, contacts, and the kind of quiet institutional memory that keeps organizations running. "Find out about a girl named Maya who works at Patty's roadside diner outside of Denton," Roy said. "Young girl, dark hair, she's got a little kid." Deke called back in 40 minutes. What he found out was this: Maya Torres, 19, single mother, 4-year-old son Lucas, had worked at Patty's Diner for 14 months without a single disciplinary mark, had been terminated that same morning by manager Gerald Swick for, according to 2 witnesses, comping a customer's meal out of her own pocket. Roy Harlan sat on that picnic bench for a long time after the call ended. He thought about Danny, who had been kind in the same uncalculating way, The kind of person who did the right thing not because they expected a reward, but because it simply did not occur to them to do otherwise. He thought about Gerald Swick, who had fired a struggling young mother for buying a stranger breakfast and who probably went home that evening feeling entirely justified. He thought about what it meant that the world kept producing people like Gerald and kept grinding down people like Maya, and he thought about whether there was anything he was actually in a position to do about it. And then Roy Harlan, who had spent 30 years on the road and knew a great many people, started making phone calls. Not angry calls, not threatening calls, just calls to men and women he had known for years. People who, like him, had complicated histories and a complicated present, but who also, like him, had learned along the way that the most important thing a person could do with whatever influence they had accumulated was use it for someone who had none. "There's a girl," he said in each call. "She did something good and it cost her. I think we should do something about that." By the time the sun went down that Thursday, 49 people had agreed to meet Roy Harlan the next morning in the parking lot of Patty's roadside diner, and Roy Harlan called one more person, a young man named Caleb Wren, 28 years old, who ran a small but profitable construction and property management company out of Denton, Texas, and who was though few people outside of that community knew it, one of the 41 scholarship recipients of the Roy and Danny Harlan Foundation. "Caleb," Roy said, "I need your help with something. There's a young woman. She needs work, and from what I understand, she needs more than that. I'll tell you the story, but first I need you to go find her." Maya had not slept well. She had spent Thursday evening calling every restaurant, grocery store, and shop in Denton and the surrounding 3-mile radius, leaving her name and number. She had found one possibility, a gas station attendant position that paid $9 an hour and had no benefits, and she had written down the number carefully and told herself it was a start. She was up at 5 as always, because her body no longer knew how to sleep past 5. She made Lucas oatmeal on the hot plate, and they ate together at the small table by the window, Lucas telling her about a dream he'd had involving a talking fish and a purple cloud, and Maya listening with her whole heart, even though her mind was 3 moves ahead, calculating, planning, measuring the distance between where she was and where she needed to be. At 8:15, there was a knock at the door of her room. She opened it to find a young man she had never seen before. He was perhaps 28, clean-cut, in work clothes, jeans, a canvas jacket, work boots with an honest face, and an expression of someone who was trying very carefully to say a thing correctly. "Are you Maya Torres?" he asked. She held the door frame. "Who are you?" "My name is Caleb Wren. I know this is unexpected, and I'm sorry to come to your home. A man named Roy Harlan asked me to find you. He said you helped him yesterday. He wanted to talk to you, not by phone, in person." He paused. "He also said if you told me to leave, I should leave, and he would understand." Maya looked at this man for a long moment. She was a young woman alone with a small child, and she had learned to be careful, but there was something in Caleb Wren's face, a directness, a slight nervousness, the look of someone who genuinely did not want to get this wrong. That was not the face of a person with bad intentions. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. She closed the door, got Lucas dressed, and came back out. Caleb drove them toward Patty's diner. Maya had no idea why, and she asked him, and he said only, "Roy wanted to explain himself in person. I think it'll make more sense when you see." She saw when they turned onto Route 9 and the diner came into view. The parking lot was full. Not with cars, with motorcycles. Row after row of them, chrome and leather in color, filling every space and spilling out along the shoulder of the road, and standing among them and sitting on their bikes and leaning against the fence. People. 50 of them, maybe more. Men and women in leather vests, some old, some middle-aged, some Lucas's age. All of them gathered with a quiet purposefulness that Maya had never seen in a crowd that size. Lucas pressed his face to the car window. "Mama," he whispered, "look at all the motorcycles." "I see them, baby," Maya said very softly. Caleb parked across the road. "You don't have to go over there," he said, "but Roy is asking if you will." She got out of the car. She took Lucas's hand. She crossed the road. The crowd opened for her as she walked in, not dramatically, just naturally, the way people make room. And at the center of it was Roy Harlan, in his leather vest, his gray beard, standing with his helmet in his hand and an expression that she could only describe as respectful. "Maya," he said. "You're the man from the diner," she said. "I am." He looked at her steadily. "I heard what happened after I left. I heard you were fired. That's between me and my former employer." "It is," he agreed. "I'm not here to fight your battles. I want to be clear about that. What I want to do," he looked around at the gathered crowd, then back at her. "What we want to do is something different." He explained quietly and plainly that the 50 people in that parking lot had each decided to come back to Patty's diner that morning and eat breakfast, all 50 of them, together, and that they would tip generously, and that every one of those tips would be handed by the waitstaff directly to Donna, the only other employee who had witnessed what happened, with a note asking that they be passed to Maya. He also explained what Caleb Wren did and what the Roy and Danny Harlan Foundation was, and that there was, if Maya wanted it, a full-time office manager position at Caleb's company, real salary, real benefits, real hours, with on-site daycare arrangements that Caleb had already made one phone call to confirm. Maya stood in that parking lot with her son's hand in hers, and she listened to all of it without speaking. And when Roy was done, she was quiet for a moment. "I didn't buy you breakfast to get something back," she said. "I know that," Roy said. "That's exactly why I'm here." Lucas, who had been listening with the solemn attention of a 4-year-old, who understands more than adults expect, tugged on Maya's hand and looked up at Roy Harlan with his serious dark eyes. "Are you a good guy?" Lucas asked. Roy Harlan looked down at the boy for a moment, and something passed across his face, a deep flicker of something old and tender. "I'm trying to be," he said quietly. Lucas considered this. Then he nodded, as though it was the right answer. Gerald Swick opened Patty's diner that Friday morning at 6, the same as always. By 7, the parking lot was full in a way it had never been full before. By 7:15, every booth and counter stool was occupied, and a line had formed outside the door. By 7:30, Gerald was in the kitchen, sweating, demanding to know what was happening, and Donna was at the counter moving as fast as her 62-year-old legs would carry her, a small, unstoppable force of efficiency and purpose. The 50 riders of the morning ate long, leisurely breakfasts. They were polite, they were patient, and they tipped each of them between $40 and $100. Donna collected every bill, every note, every folded piece of paper, and at the end of the morning rush she had a sum of money she had never held in her hands on a single shift before. She put it in an envelope with Maya's name written on it in her careful cursive. She also, on her lunch break, called the local newspaper, not maliciously. Donna was not a vindictive woman, but she had worked at that counter for 24 years, and she had watched Gerald Swick fire good people for petty reasons more times than she could count, and she had always stayed silent because it was not her place and she needed her job. This time she felt, she could not entirely explain why, but she felt that it was different. That someone should know. The reporter was a young woman named Kristen Park, who covered local interest stories for the Denton County Ledger. She came to the diner that same afternoon and talked to Donna, and then she drove to the boarding house and knocked on Maya's door. Maya, who was sitting at the small table helping Lucas with a puzzle, almost didn't open the door. But she did. She talked to Kristen Park for an hour. She told the story simply and without embellishment. The breakfast, the firing, the parking lot, Roy. She said she did not want the story to be about anger. "I want it to be about the fact that kindness isn't weakness," she said. "A lot of people think it is. I've been told my whole life that being soft gets you hurt, but I bought that man breakfast and I'd do it again tomorrow, because it was the right thing, and look what happened." The story ran on the Ledger's website the following Monday, with the headline, "Local Mother Fired for Buying Stranger Breakfast." 50 bikers show up the next day. By Tuesday, it had been picked up by 3 regional television stations. By Wednesday, it had been shared 400,000 times online. In the week that followed, Maya Torres received 47 job offers, 12 invitations to speak at community events, and a check in the mail. No return address, no note. For $10,000, which she later and quietly determined had come from Roy Harlan's foundation. She accepted Caleb Wren's job offer. She showed up at Wren Property Management on a Monday morning in a neat blouse she had bought secondhand the weekend before, with Lucas's purple dinosaur drawing folded in her purse for luck. and she sat down across from Caleb and signed the paperwork and began her first real job, with a salary, with benefits, with a desk and a chair and a computer that was hers to use. She was 19 years old. She had a long road ahead of her. She knew that. But for the first time in as long as she could remember, the road ahead looked wider than the one behind. And one more thing happened, in the quiet aftermath of everything, that Maya did not speak about publicly, but that she held close for a long time. Roy Harlan came by the office on her third day of work. He did not stay long. He sat in the chair across from her desk and they talked for about 20 minutes, about Lucas, about the foundation, about his son Danny. He showed her a photograph, a young man on a motorcycle laughing. His eyes were kind. Before he left, he stood and said, "You know what Danny would have done if someone had paid for his breakfast when he was broke on the road?" "What?" Maya asked. "Exactly what you did," Roy said. "Exactly what you did." He shook her hand, put on his helmet, and rode away. Several months have passed since that morning in the parking lot of Patty's Diner. Lucas is still 4, not for much longer, and he has a new favorite drawing subject, which is motorcycles, which he renders in enthusiastic purple crayon and tapes to the wall above his bed. Maya is still at Wren Property Management. She has been promoted once already. Not a dramatic promotion, not a corner office, but an additional responsibility and an additional $40 a week, which is real money when you count it the way Maya has always counted it. Caleb Wren told her, in a brief and plain-spoken way, that she was the most organized person on his staff and that he planned to keep her for a long time if she would stay. She said she planned to stay. Gerald Swick's diner saw a brief and complicated period after the story broke. He was not charged with anything. He had broken no law, which is itself a lesson about the limits of law and the necessity of human decency. He remained the manager for some months, but the attention the story brought and the particular light it shone on his way of managing made his position increasingly difficult. Donna stayed. The diner stayed open. Gerald eventually resigned on his own terms, or so the story went in town. Maya does not speak about Gerald with anger. She has said, in the one interview she gave, and will likely ever give, "I don't wish him ill. I think he was a person who had decided somewhere along the way that the world was a competition and that the only way to win was to make sure other people lost. I feel sorry for people who live that way. It's a very small life." Roy Harlan still rides. He came back through Denton in the spring, stopped at a different diner. Patty's felt complicated, for obvious reasons, and called Caleb, who brought Maya and Lucas to meet him. They sat outside at a picnic table and ate hamburgers, and Lucas asked Roy if he would show him how the motorcycle worked, and Roy spent 20 minutes patiently explaining every part of it to a 4-year-old who listened with the concentrated focus of someone preparing for a test. When they left, Maya hugged Roy, which surprised him, and which he received a little stiffly, in the way of a man who has not been hugged very often and is not quite sure what to do with it. But he hugged her back, briefly and firmly, and that was that. What is the lesson in this story? Maya herself is the clearest answer to that question, but she does not call it a lesson. She calls it something simpler. "I was raised to believe that kindness was a risk," she has said, "that if you opened up, you got taken, that the world would use your softness against you. And maybe sometimes that's true. Gerald used it against me. I lost my job, and I had a 4-year-old and $11.40 and nowhere to go. So if you want to use that as proof that kindness is foolish, I understand. I've been there." She pauses. "But I also sat in a parking lot with 50 people who had shown up because one of them remembered what it felt like to be seen. And I got a job and a future and a person in my corner. And my son has a motorcycle drawing above his bed. And Roy Harlan goes home knowing that one of the people Danny would have helped is going to be okay." She looks straight ahead for a moment. "You can call that luck if you want. I call it the world paying attention. I think the world pays attention more than we give it credit for. I think kindness moves, not always fast, not always in straight lines, but it moves. And I think the only way to find that out is to be kind first, before you know what it costs, before you know if it's safe." She smiles, a small uncertain smile. "Eat your breakfast while it's hot," she says. That's the whole sermon. And that, friends, is the story of Maya Torres. A 19-year-old girl with $11 and a 4-year-old son and a job she could not afford to lose, who reached into her apron pocket and bought a stranger a plate of eggs and hash browns because it was the right thing to do, who was fired for it within the hour, who sat in a parking lot and did not fall apart, who showed up the next morning and found 50 motorcycles waiting. There is something in this story that I hope you carry with you today. Not the dramatic part, not the 50 bikers, not the viral story, not the new job. Those are the payoff, and the world does not always pay off that way, and we would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. What I hope you carry is the part that happened before all of that. A tired girl at a diner table. A hungry man who could not pay. A moment where she could have looked the other way and no one would have blamed her, and she chose not to. She did not know Roy Harlan was a man of means and connections. She did not buy his breakfast as an investment. She bought it because he was a person, and he was hungry, and she had enough. Barely, but enough to help. That is the whole story. The rest is grace. So if this story moved you today, if it reached something in you that you needed to hear, please share it. Not for us, not for the numbers. Share it because somewhere out there is a person having a very hard morning, and they need to be reminded that kindness is not foolish, that doing the right thing is worth it, that the world, sometimes, is paying attention. Like this video, if Maya's story stayed with you. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things, not because they were powerful or famous or certain it would work out, but because they were human and they decided to act like it. And if you have a story of your own, a moment when you chose kindness and something unexpected came of it, share it in the comments. We read everyone. Be kind today. Be patient today. Hold the door. Buy the coffee. See the person in front of you. You never know which parking lot you are about to fill.